everybody, and welcome to the Spoiler Warning podcast. I'm Christopher Schnese.
And I'm Stephen Miller.
And you are listening to the third and final part of our coverage of the 2024 Toronto International Film Festival. Normally, this is a film enthusiast podcast where we dive in, debate, discuss, and argue over the latest films coming to a theater near you. But now, we're finally home. We're going to knock out the last 8 films that we saw at the festival. We'll be done with this run. If you've been enjoying it, sorry, it's coming to an end. If you haven't been enjoying it, good luck, it's over. This is the last one.
And hey, we waited long enough that now 2 of these films not only are coming to a theater near you soon, but have already come to a theater near you. So you can actually race out and watch a couple of these.
Yeah, so that's good for people who may or may not enjoy those films. Yeah, I know you had some other travel right after we got back. So you know, doubly, Stephen, how's it feel to be home?
It feels good. I am definitely tired. Not only have I been traveling, but every trip seems to take me back to the East Coast, roughly. So I feel like every week I'm just zigzagging across time zones, and I'm definitely looking forward to being home for longer than a week this time, hopefully, getting to adjust to a normal time zone and to the same bed every night. Yeah, feeling good.
Good. Yeah. It's I luckily haven't had any travel yet since I got back, but it is hard to be gone for a while, reintegrate, come back, and then be like, all right, we got one more episode to record. I can't completely dump that week out of my mind.
Have you gone to see movies like with Gen Pop again, or is the film festival still your last time?
I have. So I saw a little film called My Old Ass.
I almost saw that the night before I left for Nashville, and then I felt like I was too tired.
Yeah. I almost texted you while you were out and be like, I don't know, on the off chance you have a free night there, might be worth checking out. I enjoyed it, and I'm not going to promise we're going to talk about it because...
We'll see what happens this weekend.
Yeah. But yeah, we're not here to talk about My Old Ass. My Old Ass is also sitting here to talk about that movie.
Amen.
But what do you say we get into it, Stephen?
Let's do it.
All right. Why don't you start us off?
Sure. So the first movie in this third batch is a little film called Nightbitch. This is the latest by Marielle Heller, who did... was it called The Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood or Won't You Be My Neighbor? I always get the two mixed up, the documentary and the fiction. She did the one that was Tom Hanks as Mr. Rogers. She also did Can You Ever Forgive Me? And she's like a pretty beloved director who we have seen films of hers at the Toronto Film Festival in the past. This one is a story about a new mother, relatively new. Her kid is a toddler. She's played by Amy Adams, and she's very stressed. She's home alone. Her husband travels for work a lot, and she's just feeling, unhappy, unfulfilled, right? She's always chasing this toddler around. She can't seem to hit a groove with all the other moms at all the countless events that she's supposed to go to and pretend to enjoy. She used to be an artist. She used to live in New York City, and now she's just like, who am I? Oh, and she also thinks she might be turning into a dog. This is a movie that I found it very enjoyable. I have no big criticisms of it. It's like definitely charming. It does signpost every twist it will ever make, like at the beginning of the movie. There is nothing like remotely surprising, at least to me, that happens here. It is very much like what I just told you. Extrapolate if you were to make a movie about that subject, and this is probably that movie for the most part. What sells it, though, for me is Amy Adams, I think, is very good in this movie and very, very, very committed to the premise. Yeah. And so even though the central metaphor that I won't dig into, but you can probably extrapolate already, is like pretty clear. Her embodying that, I think, is a lot of fun to watch, and she does tease out a lot of emotion from this premise. To me, this was like it was a Tully that wasn't quite as like sharp or aggressive as I felt like Tully was, but it was playing in the same sandbox of like a movie that is willing to show the unflattering kind of darker side of parenthood and what you regret and the lack of freedom. So I enjoyed it for the most part. I really think, though, Amy Adams is doing a lot of the heavy lifting here, and the story itself, I wished it had a few more. It didn't even have to be surprising, just like go places that hit me a little deeper. It felt like a little more surface level than I would have expected. How did you feel about Nightbitch?
Yeah, I mean, everything you're saying is absolutely correct on this film. This is basically totally light. I think I enjoyed it a little more than you. Not because it did anything that you thought was missing, but just because, like, I was 100% fine with exactly what this was bringing to the table. Like this is based on a novel, but it also feels like somebody made a short film about the Nightbitch and then got asked to make a full movie about it and just took the short film instead of like having the short film be like the first 10 minutes and then extrapolate from there. It's sort of just like this was the entire short film, but for 2 hours instead of 10 minutes.
Totally.
But for me, I was just fine with that. Like, I enjoyed the sandbox that this film represented, and I enjoyed watching Amy Adams just go for it, like, fully, like this is her Dementis or whatever from Furiosa, you know what I mean? Like, it was just like she was just going for it. She was enjoying the hell out of it, and you could tell that she really enjoyed making this film,
right.
And it's like that for me brings so much merit to what it's doing that I don't need it to be more insightful or anything like that. It's just kind of like, yeah, like fucking this is great.
Right.
Like we're talking about it in part 3, right? So we already had a series of 9 films and then a series of 8 films, and it's like starting off this next batch of films with Nightbitch. I was just like, this is a perfect like third section of the festival right now. Like, I'm loving this.
Yeah, I mean, I was, and I think maybe I'm painting it a little bit too muted. Like, I had a very nice time with this movie. Everything you just said is true, especially the idea that it feels like a short film that they decided to pad into a feature. But it is a very fun first film. Like, I mean this not as a criticism when I say that this kind of feels like a Scrubs cutaway scene that is like extended to feature length. It's like a little. It's like intentionally a little bit goofy, but then it hits you with heart in ways that you expect, but it still pulls it off well. And yeah, I mean, Amy Adams is great here, and I don't know her own life, like if she has kids or not, but it feels like the kind of movie you make when you are like, I want to tell this story, like this is resonating with me in particular, and I'm gonna show you the real dark underbelly of what it means to raise a kid. So yeah. Total respect for this movie. I'm sure people who are parents will get even more out of it too. It's just, I think I did pull an all-nighter basically right before watching this. So I think I wanted something that was going to punch me in the face just a little bit more than this did.
Yeah, and if there's one film at the festival that skewers parenthood much better than this, it's probably The Wild Robot. So
yes, definitely.
And it does it more in like 30-second gags than it does in this whole film. Yep. But they're different. It's yeah. All right, so let's move on to our next film, and that is a little film called Matt and Mara. This is directed by Kazik Radwanski, and it stars Dara Campbell and Matt Johnson. And basically, this is one of those films. This is a fully improvised film that is a story of a woman who's kind of got her stuff set up, and an old friend that she sort of grew up with who comes back around, and sort of, they start to do their friend hanging out thing. And it's really just a dissection of like, when somebody who is very, very charismatic from your life comes back into your life suddenly and sort of transposes you back into like that position you were back when you spent every day with that person, and kind of like how that messes with your head in the context of like the normal stuff that you're doing. And this is a film that it definitely was one of those things where I think we both were excited to check it out at the festival. These type of films really hinge on, because they're largely improvised, and there's some sort of, there is a outline that they're all playing to, but the characters kind of say whatever they feel in the moment and do their thing. That gives you a really naturalistic performance for the most part. But what it also gives you is people just talking about stuff, and how good this film becomes is 100% contingent on how engrossing the thoughts those characters have in the improvisational moment. And for me, this film didn't quite delve to the deepness that I would get from other films in this sort of genre, right? Like, really, you want to be in, like, I want to walk out of this being like, oh my God, they said all the things that I think all the time, right? And instead I got like people in a very specific situation, and one guy who is like so charismatic it curves around to the other side and becomes obnoxious. Mm-hmm. And it's like, this felt like a film that was less insightful about relationships and where people see themselves in relation to their place in life with the histories they used to have and stuff like that, and more just feels like two friends making a film together. And I think for me that sort of was lacking in this story, but overall I think I enjoyed it, and it was like I never felt alienated by this film. It was just a thing that I kept wanting it to go deeper, and every time it started to get to a conversation that I was like, okay, let's do this, tell me something insightful, it would just pivot to something else, or it would become a joke or something else. But I'm hoping that you like this more than me, Stephen. What did you think of it?
I think I did. I mean, what I learned, we stayed for the Q&A of this one, and I found that valuable, not because they answered things about the film, but because it contextualized the movie for me. In this case, realizing that Kasich is basically like the Joe Swanberg of Toronto. Like, it seems like there is this like new Canada movement of like micro-budget filmmakers that are doing this improv thing where they work with the same actors over and over again. And I famously am a fan of that genre. Like, I went on a mumblecore kind of binge of probably at this point, it was like a decade ago. And I just like it. You know, I like movies that try to just be about simple emotions, that try to just let characters be together and explore the kind of micro moments. I think for me, what I look for in a film like that is not the big conversation where I go, oh my God, that is what I think. That's what I would say. It is like it's more like they're exploring awkwardness and how people like talk around what they really mean and how they don't quite know how to connect the right way. Like, to me, that is what these kind of movies zoom into. And that's what I felt like this movie did really well, is it's a poetry teacher and she's reconnecting with her ex. And for the most part, it's all platonic. You know, for the most part, nothing really happens, but there's the awkwardness of their like re-engagement, and their like how easily they slip into this new groove, and the way they kind of like don't quite know how to act around each other, and she doesn't really know how to talk about him to other people, and it is very small, and it's not like doing a ton, but I have a soft spot in my heart for this kind of movie. So I was charmed by this. It isn't going to end up on like an end of the year list or anything for me. Like, it didn't blow me away, but I found it natural enough between the two people, and I just like the idea, much like Under the Volcano, of a movie that is mostly about not talking about the thing you really have to talk about, and like what you do when you give actors that directive. And I thought this was a sweet, even if pretty small, experiment. Yeah. And there's a scene that involves taking a Jesus off a wall that I thought was really funny.
It's pretty amazing. Worth the price of admission, for sure. Definitely.
All right. Moving on to a little film called Daniela Forever. This is the latest film from Nacho Vigalondo. You may know him from Time Crimes or Colossal, which we reviewed on the podcast. And this is a story about a man, who's played by Henry Golding, who recently lost the woman he was in love with, named Daniela. And in order to cope, he winds up enrolling in a program that gives people a drug that gives them lucid dreams, like lets them control what it is they dream about. And the theory is that there might be some therapeutic value in bringing him back to times when he was happy apart from her, right? He can kind of like practice being independent. But of course, he doesn't do it that way. He does what I would probably do, you would probably do in this scenario, which is instead just endlessly build an altar to Daniela, fashioning the perfect idealized memory of their relationship and trying to live in it forever. I really admired how audacious this movie is. Like, Nacho is just diving headfirst into territory mined by like some of the greatest films of all time, right? Like this is so Eternal Sunshine coded. And the fact that he's even willing to like play in that sandbox is pretty daring to me. I love the idea of exploring like who is the idealized version of the person you were in love with versus who they actually are. Can they ever really fit in your head? If you only have the version that fits in your head, are you really connecting with anyone? All of that is like catnip for me. Like I'm super into that stuff. And I think in general, it's done really well. Like I was pretty engaged with a lot of it. It is also very scrappy and experimental, though. Like it does this thing where it shifts tones so that Henry Golding's real life has this dull, fake quality, like a 90s soap opera. I think I mentioned it reminding me of I saw the TV Globe before. And that's cool. I get it. It makes like the dreams look more vivid and lucid and real life be dull. But it has this weird effect on me where my brain just goes, I am not going to pay attention to that shit. like because it didn't feel like a real movie when that was happening. And over time, as the movie piled on kind of complications and got a bit crazier and crazier, I have to admit, I just started to have trouble following it.
Yeah.
Something about it. I don't know if it was that the movie had too many ideas going on or got too convoluted. I don't know if it was my lack of sleep finally was catching up to me, or if it was just the aesthetic style, the way it like bounces between different looks and feels just kind of made my brain not latch on. But I was really into it for like the first half. And then by the second half, I was kind of like, okay, when are we going to wrap up? So I don't know. I kind of would love to see this again after a full night of sleep and no distractions in the theater and see what it does to me. Because I love the ideas. There's just something about the execution where it felt like it never quite went beyond the ideas that it wanted to mine. How about you?
Yeah, I was pretty excited for this film going into it. I didn't know, what to expect, but it seemed like a cool, interesting premise, and I was there for it. I think, even ignoring what you were saying about like it feeling like it's playing in the space of other great films where it feels like it's sort of trying to borrow from them. I think that this is a weird situation where this concept is great. Mm-hmm. Like there's nothing wrong with this concept. I'm 100% here for this concept. Even the starting execution of the concept feels good. Like when the character's playing in the world and trying to understand the rules and trying to figure out what is happening in the lucid dreams and what he can or can't control, or what even controlling the environment gets for him. I really like that experimental stage of this film. Obviously, he begins to overuse the thing and start to realize that, like, this lucid dreaming is sort of a monkey paw situation where maybe it's not the best thing, or what he's doing is maybe not the proper use of this technology. I don't know why I don't like this movie. Like, all the pieces
sounds like
are
you're
there.
in similar territory, basically.
Yeah. All the pieces are there. Everything makes sense. It's just something about it feels like a lesser than to me, and I can't put my finger on any one thing, because every piece of it, like, it's all there. and I don't know if I'm just not taking the pill to lucidly dream and love this film, or what's going on. But I just feel like there was something that, like, I wanted to feel something more tangible that I wanted to feel for this film that made it feel more than just sort of like an experiment. And yeah, I don't know how this film could have improved itself, because all the pieces are there.
Yeah, there's a word that is coming to mind for me when it comes to his dream life and his relationship with Daniela, which is twee. Like, it kind of feels like a little bit too cute by a half instead of feeling real, And obviously that's kind of intentional. It's idealized, but I feel like it for me, it might be that it never gave me the real meat of a relationship that would give me like the feels or the cries that would let me then coast when it goes into more heightened territory. It's like even the relationship seemed heightened and a little bit half-baked, and so it doesn't have quite the same grounding that would carry me through the rest.
Yeah. And I guess too, there is like, maybe this is the same thing you're talking about right now, and maybe I'm just articulating it differently, but it feels like this, if this film was deadly serious, but all the events were exactly the same, it would be better. Because even the performances are kind of like, hey kids, we're lucid dreaming now. It doesn't feel like the characters actually believe what they're doing. It feels like they are acting out a script. and not actually living it out. And I think that's there's just like, I don't believe you.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't buy into the world as a whole. Yeah. But yeah, that is Daniela Forever. Moving on is a little film called Bring Them Down, which is a film directed by Christopher Andrews and starring Christopher Abbott and Barry Keoghan. And it is basically kind of a small story of we'll say a dispute between two neighbors who kind of have slightly intertwined histories, family histories that have kind of made the normal neighbor dispute to be a little bit heightened by previous events in the back lives of some of the characters involved. But it's ultimately a very small story, right? It's this film that takes place like basically on a hillside in Ireland, and is basically just these two people who both raise sheep or rams or whatever, and kind of just have a dispute over some of them that go missing. And it is it is one of those films that like, there are moments of quick violence, but overall it is a sort of quiet, contemplative film where it also feels like there's just a powder keg that is about to explode at all times. And like, people are just burying it down and dealing with stuff that like, this film at any point could just turn into John Wick, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, what if John Wick was like, no, I don't want to be the Baba Yaga. I specifically just want to be quiet on my farm and take care of my dad. Don't make me be the Baba Yaga.
Right.
And I think ultimately I enjoyed this film. It was a nice little film. It doesn't reach out of that and goes like, damn, you're gonna remember Bring Them Down. But like, you watch Bring Them Down and you're like, yeah, I feel that.
Yeah, like it definitely brought me down. Yeah, like I was trying to think of how I would describe this movie, and it's like a gothic story about how people find themselves at the end of the rope doing things that they never thought they would have done before, right? Hurting people because they might be hurting on their own. And that sounds pretty cheesy, but when you make it about sheep farming in rural Ireland, it's suddenly pretty fucking cool. And I think the movie is really interesting because Christopher Abbott and Barry Keoghan are like two great actors who are both really good at, having things hidden beneath the surface, right? I like to joke on the podcast even that Christopher Abbott always plays like a total piece of shit. And Barry, he's really good at having the character who like, you don't really understand why he would snap, but you are afraid that he is going to at any moment.
Yeah.
And this movie is really about like, it almost feels like they took the idea of one or two big violent events and then worked back into being like, how can we tell a story that would explain how two people would get into this situation? And I think my only criticism of the movie is also probably what Christopher Andrews wanted, which is I didn't know what motivated Christopher Abbott and Barry Keoghan into some of their more extreme choices throughout the movie. Like, they take some big leaps, and I think the story hinges on me believing those leaps. And instead, like, I believe everything that comes after of like, these are people who have done that thing, and now I get what they're doing. But like, the decision itself, it's like the emotions are so buried down, I didn't really feel it all the time. And that's what kept this from being great to me, is because I felt like they were acting out the plot of this interesting gothic drama, but I didn't feel like, oh my God, I see how you like set up the dominoes and led to this like inevitable moment that had to occur. It kind of was like, I don't know, the violence didn't feel out of place. It just didn't like, it didn't feel like there was like agency, or at least I couldn't follow the character all the time. It's
a little bit of that escalated quickly.
Mm-hmm. But definitely.
But yeah, like, it is interesting that like that balance you're talking about between those two characters, where one of them is like, has done all the things and right now is just trying to bury it down and not do anything.
Yeah.
And the other one's sort of just tortured, is stuck in a place, doesn't know how to get out of it, is confused and angry at everyone. And the way that manifests in certain actions is just like, it's inherently sympathetic, even though nothing Barry Keoghan no action he does is sympathetic at all. Like,
Right.
it's a lot of like, yeah, well, what the fuck did you think was going to happen? But you still feel for him just because there's something about the way he plays these characters that like you instantly feel for him. You feel like even though he's happening to other people, you feel like other people are happening to him.
Right.
Which is like the type of thing that makes this film so interesting to watch, even if it's not a grand story that I'm going to remember forever. It's gonna be like, what was Bring Them Down about? Some dispute over some Rams.
Yeah. It's a two-hander between Barry Keoghan and Buried Emotions.
Yeah. Very nice. But yeah, want to take us on to a film that people can see right now?
They sure can. This is a little film called The Substance by Coralie Farge. I think in my can update, I've said Fargeet because I had never heard anyone pronounce her name before. I've learned. I know better. I'm fluent in French. The movie stars Demi Moore as Elizabeth Sparkle, who is a former actress who is now a kind of like exercise workout icon of sorts, who is... she's getting older, and eventually she gets to a place where they don't want her on the network anymore. They want to replace her with someone younger and more attractive. And after this happens, she discovers this idea of the substance, which promises to, in some way, make her younger and more beautiful again. And different people are deciding different levels of spoiler for this movie. I still can't decide how much I want to say about it. I'll just say the substance is a monkey's paw, which gives her what she wants, being young and beautiful in a way, but it also has a cost. And it's kind of reflected by Demi Moore as the cost and Margaret Qualley as the idealized version of youth and beauty. I loved this thing at Cannes. It was just like a bracing, slap in the face to like a bunch of cinephiles who are used to like, kind of like snooty, heady dramas, to just get this like intense body horror, heavy genre, give no fucks type of movie. And I really wanted to see it again at Toronto to see like, how would I feel about it now that I know everything that is going to happen? Was it a novelty act or is it that the movie itself carries it? And then also, how is a new audience at Toronto going to feel now that they know they've been told this is an amazing genre movie that keeps building and building and is not going to overhype it, right? And I think this movie soared on both counts. Like, I had a great time. The audience seemed to have a great time. It just has this ability to crescendo and crescendo and crescendo in a way that still keeps you engaged and never just peaks where you're like, okay, this is ridiculous, now I'm out. It is just so much fun, and it is so much fun to experience in a crowd. So I was really glad for the chance to see it a second time. And even though we're not talking about it until after it has already come out wide, I'm glad I got to see it in a festival crowd with a just very engaged, rapt audience. I had a blast with this movie. Christopher, how did you feel, especially after I hyped it up so much for The Substance?
Well, ironically enough, I was going to say as my lead-in that you talked about this at a can, and you way undersold this movie. Yeah, I mean, like, obviously, I knew I was going to be getting into something that has a potential to, like, just perplex an audience, or not perplex them, but, like, keep them on their toes and just, like, have everybody just not knowing where it could possibly go next. But I wasn't quite ready for the level of commitment and how fast this movie gets into it, right? This is not a film that, like, starts to create the tones of something weird going to happen and then getting weird by the end. This is a film that, like, as soon as it possibly can, gets weird, it gets frantic. You have kind of, this film is kind of told from two points of view. One that is sort of like skewering the world of like a male-dominated industry that is, like, you know, just chewing up women and spitting them out. And then the other side is like the scary, frantic nature. It's like one half of this movie is like Requiem for a Dream. Mm-hmm. And then the other half of the movie is like Neon Demon or something, right?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And like that all comes together so well and really is just from the start. Plus, like, I was eating up the world building of, like, what is the substance? How does it work?
Yeah.
What are the rules? How do characters play with the rules that they are given? What do they learn from those rules? It was kind of like, this is like, you know, people talk about 4-quadrant movies, but like inside of Chris's brain, there's also 4 quadrants. And like,
Right.
this film hits every single box of all the things that I enjoy and stuff, and just mashes that together in such a wonderful, beautiful way. This is one of those films where, like, you come out of the movie, you're sweating, your adrenaline's going, you're just like, holy shit, what I just watched. Did we all just watch this together? This was amazing. And yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. It is kind of like, we split our reviews into 3 different parts, but it is like, I'm glad that we saw this and The Last Showgirl so far apart, because like the fact that these two are playing at a festival together is just kind of like not fair to The Last Showgirl.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I even lumped this in with Nightbitch and Baby Girl too, of movies that are like all about kind of the central thing about a woman who maybe is feeling discarded or somehow less than, and kind of maybe heightened things that they might do to feel powerful again. And the substance is just such a fucking like firecracker compared to anything else.
Yeah.
It kind of just like, to me, like blows them all out of the water. And you know, all of those movies are being seen as like major performances by their leads. A comeback for Pamela Anderson, and then also the amazing Amy Adams and Nicole Kidman turns. For my money, Demi Moore like beats them all. She's just so totally committed to this. So people say fearless all the time as like a filler word, you know, when they're reviewing things, but she goes to dark places, and both she and Margaret Qualley are like not afraid to put their body and self-image on the line to leave it all on the field for this movie. And I think it's really fucking incredible.
Yeah. Kudos to both of them. All the women you mentioned, but specifically this film rocks.
Yeah.
All right. Now on to the next film. Is a little film called The Piano Lesson, which is directed by Malcolm Washington, and it is starring Samuel L. Jackson, John David Washington, and Danielle Deadwyler. Basically, it is a story of sort of a family. It's centered around a family kind of discussing this family heirloom, which is a piano that was sort of carved and engraved by one of their enslaved ancestors. And it is sort of a story of family lineage and, you know, a bunch of stuff like that. And this is a film that is based on a play of the same name. And this film feels like a play, right? Like the way dialogue is introduced, you kind of have largely one location for most of the film. Characters arrive, you know, introduce themselves, say everything they did that day in this very play sort of way. And, you know, it's the kind of thing when you watch it and like, even if the performances are good, you might think to yourself like, oh, like what was the goal of bringing this to film? And this film, by the end of it, says, I know that's going to be your question. I'm going to show you exactly why it was important to bring this to film. And that's because, like what this film does visually, and sort of emotionally by the end of this film, like this film ends with a wallop that makes you go like, thank you for coming to the theater. This is what you came for. Congratulations. Like this movie hits so hard at the end. I walked out of this like going like, holy shit. Like I don't know what I expected, but I wasn't prepared for what I got. And the style and the execution and just like the visual presentation of what it goes through at the end and that huge crescendo that it leads up to is so amazing that like I walked away going like, holy, that was a fucking movie.
Yeah. And no, I felt exactly the same. For a while, the play-like aspect was, I was getting caught on it, you know, especially John David Washington in particular. I feel like he very often just feels like he's delivering a monologue directly to the camera. You know, there's just something about it. And again, this is a period piece like set in Pittsburgh after the Great Depression. Characters are talking, you know, in a way that just, you have seen these actors before. So now seeing them deliver this dialogue, it's just like, there's something where it was a little hard for me to fully believe them for a while. I kept feeling like I am watching a play. And then there are a few moments, you know, there's the crescendo that it builds towards that I felt the exact same about. I was like, holy shit, how did that happen? Yeah. How does that exist in this movie that is otherwise a very like staid, like, true to the theater type of play. But there's like a musical moment halfway through this movie that I found very like powerful and surprising. There are like little grace notes too where characters interact, especially like vaguely romantic moments where it isn't so driven by dialogue. It's much more like quiet and stuff that I felt like, wow, okay, now I'm watching a movie. So there was enough there to keep me engaged even before the wallop. But I did struggle for maybe the first hour of this movie to be like, okay, what am I meant to be following here? Can I step out of this like layer of superficial play likeness that I kind of feel like I'm being stuck in to appreciate the drama? And I eventually got there. So it was like half for me a kind of rough experience, and then it was so good by the end that I walked away just feeling positive. But it makes me wonder how this will do when it goes on Netflix, when people are more distracted and potentially like don't get the same kind of wallop. I'm very curious what'll happen there.
Yeah. Like especially the being enveloped in all of what's happening by the end of the film definitely helps with that. And if you are just kind of like have it on the TV and sort of keep checking, X or whatever on your phone, like you might lose some of that experience, or especially some of the quick flashes that happen earlier on in the film, right? Where like something just happens and then characters are talking about it. But if you're not watching it when it happens, again, it might just be that play kind of thing where somebody's like, yeah, there's something. And then it's like, it is a film that is worth sitting with and being invested in it as you go on, and then just being able to really experience it from everybody's point of view altogether. But man, that last shot as the crescendo is ending is like amazing. Like I can still see how that works on stage. Like I could assume that shot is exactly how it is on stage, but there's just something different about the way you can do it with film that justifies it's being brought to the big screen.
I totally agree. I feel like when we left this movie, we both were kind of like, whoa. I did not see that coming. Yeah. All right. The next film is a little movie called Saturday Night, directed by Jason Reitman. This is set in October 1975, and it is following basically the 90 minutes leading up to the start of the very first episode of SNL. This is a movie with a totally packed cast. It will be nearly impossible to actually go through and describe all of them. I don't even know if I'm going to try. I'll just say it. Lorne Michaels is the ringleader, played by Gabriel LaBelle, who was in The Fabelmans, so relative newcomer who's getting a lot of great roles. And it basically shows him and Rachel Sennett, who is playing his wife, as they kind of wander from place to place inside of 30 Rock and see all the different chaotic things that are about to fall apart before SNL goes live. And the premise of this movie is like, are they going to make it? What was the chaos? What was the ridiculousness that led to this big, at the time, countercultural moment that was SNL? And just honestly using that framework as an excuse to let a ton of actors do a lot of fun work, a lot of fun impressions of very famous people, and also compress this 90-minute movie into like a greatest hits collection almost of SNL things, because they get to like give you like, here are 3 minutes of them rehearsing a skit that probably dragged if you went 6 minutes and actually watched the whole thing. Here is John Belushi being John Belushi. Here is Chevy Chase being a total piece of shit to people. Here, like they just pack in a ton of stuff and just let actors kind of have at it. For me, a lot of those things, first of all, this movie is a lot of fun. I am not really critical of this movie. I think when it comes out, you should go see it, and you will probably also have fun. Clears that bar for sure. Beyond that, it felt kind of hit or miss to me in terms of like some of those skits, those like 3-minute backstage things worked really well. Others kind of like fell flat to me, and almost all of them, after a while, I felt like, okay, I'm watching people do an impression of a funny thing, but I can't totally tell if this is like building to more than just a bunch of funny impressions of funny things that actually happened. And like, I don't know, there was a lot to love in this movie. Like I particularly enjoyed, I'm blanking on his name, Matthew Braun, I think, the Succession guy who played both Andy Kaufman and Jim Henson. I thought he was really funny. there is like a head writer who gets some really good barbs at a censor when he's trying to stop her from stopping the production. Like, there are things here that gave me good chuckles. There was something that like never really added up to much more for me than just a kind of like fun nostalgia piece. And a thing that I kind of wrestled with about this movie is it's like the movie is framing like the past versus the new, and the past is represented by like J.K. Simmons as Milton Berle, I think his name was, this like old timey guy who like has his, he was big in the golden age, and now he's just like shimmying on a stage with showgirls, and he's like the sedate old entertainment that Hollywood wants. And these are the rebels, these are the rabble rousers, the people that are gonna shake things up, do things differently. They're gonna be chaos. And there's something about like watching that story in a movie that is like 100% nostalgia for 50-year-old people that like just felt like, I don't know. I get like Jason Reitman, like his dad was probably like best friends with all of these people. So I get like he probably has a ton of nostalgia. I wanted more of a punch. Like, I don't know if you've watched Hacks, but like I wanted something more like that was going to like actually like dig into the comedy scene and have a little bite to it. And instead I was like, well, that was a lot of fun, but it was also maybe like the most boring way that fun could have been given to me. And I would have liked to see just a little bit more. How about you?
Yeah, I enjoyed this film. I'm gonna be honest, like only like half the cast I knew who they were portraying. Like some people it's really, really painfully obvious, and some people I like don't have enough familiarity with like the older cast of SNL to like have fondness enough for them to remember who is being portrayed and how accurate or not accurate that presentation is. So I was kind of I was simultaneously scratching the like, yeah, SNL is a thing that like I did watch with my family growing up. It's sort of a thing that I watch now today. And Jamie and I watch that while it's airing, and it just becomes like a part of our night, the way that like Game of Thrones is a Sunday night thing, SNL becomes a Saturday night thing, and it just becomes a thing that you kind of build into your life, not because it's always great, not because it's groundbreaking or revolutionary, but because it's just a staple of things that you consume. And when it hits, and everybody talks about how it hits. And when it doesn't, you forget that it didn't, right? It's just you want there to be more SNL when there's not SNL on. And when it's on, you complain about it not being that great, but then you still miss it, right? So I was sort of watching this film not as like a comparison of old or new, or not as something that had to be funny, but watching this more of, I'm going to make a reference to something I haven't actually watched, but just because I feel like it fits. But like there's that documentary, like 6 Days to Air, about like South Park and how much work goes into just making an episode last minute and making it work. And this is the 90 minutes to air, but for SNL, right? And I think watching the chaos of it and just kind of acknowledging that this shouldn't work, it shouldn't ever work. And when you see a skit that bombs, you should remember how much shit happened right before everybody went out and bombed in that skit, and like, every once in a while you will send me, YouTube links for cut skits that are like, they were cut for a reason, but like you're laughing and then you make me have to watch it. And it's like, I enjoyed just the watching the chaos that goes into a thing. And I'm sure it's not actually that chaotic now. Then it probably was very chaotic because of the personalities involved at the time and trying to get everybody to do it. But it's like, they're going to go to air. There's a whole thing where it's like, oh my God, are they going to cancel this at the last second? It's like, well, no, they're not. This aired. Like, you can watch the episode they are doing right now. So it feels like the stakes shouldn't be there, but you still feel them, and the chaos is enough to be entertaining. The skits aren't necessarily that funny. When I went back and watched the thing on Peacock or whatever, they also weren't really that funny. But I can see how at the time they probably were super funny. You know what I mean? It's just they don't hit the same way anymore. But I was also surprised how many musical acts there are in the old days of SNL.
Yeah, they were really leaning on that hard. Also, how many cuts to George Carlin there were back then. They were really like letting him do a lot of heavy lifting. I mean, I don't disagree with you about the joy of any of it. And I have the same relationship with SNL. Like, I always liked Jesse David Fox always talks about SNL being like a sport, where it's like, no one says like, oh, football is always good, but they always want to watch the game because they want to know how the players do. And that's the story. That's the conversation. Like, oh, who did really well last night? Who fucked up last night? When was the good season? When were the glory days? You know, like it's an institution and it's fun in that way. I think what gets me about the kind of 90 minutes to air mentality is that the South Park thing is fun because it is real. And when I hear about how South Park is made, I am, at least back when they actually made it as episodes rather than like getting paid millions of dollars to do like 2 episodes a year or whatever they do now. Back in the days, South Park, it was like, yeah, how do you write a story and animate it in time to go to air, right? 90 minutes of sketches that come on once a week, I have trouble actually seeing that as like that amazing.
That is a really great point, Stephen. A point that I would definitely know if I had been listening to the last 2 minutes of you talking, but unfortunately I had technical difficulties and got dropped during whatever great point you were making. You have your recording, though, so we're going to leave that in. And I'm just going to be an awkward transition between the end of your sentence, wherever it stopped, and now. And I'll
you can decide. You can decide where in my trailing sentences, as I slowly realize that you seem to not be paying attention. You want to leave, and I'll just kind of head to the TLDR, which is, I like the live sporting, the excitement of will they make the big game or won't they? But the difference between this and the South Park documentary is the South Park doc is real. And I believe it is crazy that they can make an animated film, animated show week after week on such a tight turnaround.
Yeah.
I think it's less crazy that they can do 1 week of sketches, like a weekly sketch show. That doesn't seem crazy to me in a world with The Daily Show and all the other things we've seen where people can churn out comedy at an even faster pace. And pile on that this is a fictional movie that is synthetically compressing time and telling me shit all happened one after another, which I just don't believe is true. And it makes it feel like it is trying to make me be so excited for the stakes that don't exist, that they made up the pressure cooker, and the combo just makes it hard for me to be like super invested in it, you know, because isn't it crazy this shit happened? It's like, isn't it crazy that some of this happened and I have no idea which of it is real and which of it Jason Reitman made up for the sake of the movie?
Yeah, and I'm 100% on, like, I didn't watch this thinking like, oh my god, this is what they do for real. It was just kind of like, yeah, it is crazy that they do this, and it probably is chaos, and like, I enjoyed that aspect of it. But yeah, I'm not treating this as like the gospel of how they achieved this first thing. But I still enjoyed it for the way it presented that, right? It's like, the SNL version of the Steve Jobs movie or something.
Yeah, 100%. The difference, though, is the Steve Jobs movie is interested in kind of interrogating Jobs, like the myth versus the actual flawed guy. This movie is not interested in that in Lauren. Lauren is just like the genius who brought them all together, and he gets a big speech about how important it is, and then the movie's over.
Yeah.
You know, it's the lack of like any self-awareness that is kind of a little weird to me about this movie. But I still liked it. I still had fun. I think you'll have fun too. I just think it could have been amazing, and instead it wasn't.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about the last film, which is The Salt Path, which is a film directed by Marianne Elliott, and it stars Gillian Anderson and Jason Isaacs, and it's basically a story of a couple who lose their home, and in the process of losing their home, learn that one of them has a terminal illness, and they decide to walk the Salt Path, which is this 630-mile trek along the coast of England, or the English coast side, between Dorset and Somerset. You know, I was very excited going into this film. It was one that was like, oh yeah, this seems great. Like an older couple doing this long walk in the wilderness, just reminiscing about their life. Like, this could be great. And this film is wildly different than what I expected. I expected the dialogue aspect of what I just presented as a concept, right? But instead, it's really about just the feeling of being at the end of your wits, potentially the end of your life, the end of your, normal day-to-day living, and just saying like, fuck it, maybe we don't need a home. Maybe we don't need the idea of living for many, many more years. What if we just go out with a backpack and whatever we can wear and just exist on this path that is a like a big trek that takes a lot out of you. And if life's taken a lot out of you, why not just be in the state of having a lot taken out of you just by the elements? And I thought this was a very beautiful film that is quiet. There's not a lot of plot necessarily. It's really just, hey, we're going to go out and do this walk at like a slow pace because that's the nature of what we have to do given our conditions. And we're just going to exist. We're going to read Beowulf. Yeah. We're going to just do our thing, and this will just be our life, and we'll just see how it goes. It's based off a memoir, and I think my only real complaint about the film is that at some point they said, like, well, this is the budget we have to make this much of a film. We'll just complete the rest of the story in text at the end of the movie. And I don't know that finishing point is necessarily the resolve I'm looking for in whatever the story is. But like every moment of this film, I was riveted, oftentimes in ways that I couldn't explain to you if you asked me to tell you. I already joked about reading Beowulf. There is like a recitation of Beowulf that like made me tear up, and I have no idea why. Like I love everything this movie is doing. What did you think of it, Stephen?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you say. Like, obviously, it didn't make me tear up the way Zemeckis' Beowulf movie did. I mean, that's just the most beautiful. But yeah, this is a lovely movie that is a little hard to explain. I didn't go in fully expecting the walk and talk type film. In my mind, it was like maybe this was going to be Before Midnight, or maybe this was going to be a survivalist movie, or not like in an intense thriller way, but in like a Nomadland way of just like let's do a deep dive into what it feels like to be living on the open road, and how would that be? And instead, it's kind of in between. This is a movie that is like, it is quiet. It's about like tender conversations between people. The stakes are real, but they don't never feel like that heightened. Like, I don't recall there being moment to moment times where I'm like, are they going to make it? What is going to happen next? It's more like a slow buildup of the dawning realization of, I don't know what life is like anymore. It's like an existential crisis that takes the form of a slow motion walk as they just kind of like figure themselves out. And I think it's beautiful. It's a winning combination. Gillian Anderson and Jason Isaacs are both very charming in the movie. I found it very sweet. I agree with you about, I think it stops at a kind of unnecessary place. I think it could have told the whole story and probably worked just as well. But yeah, it was nice. It was a really nice way to end the festival, I thought, just with an unambiguously sweet, gentle, earnest movie. It never went maybe as big as I would have loved. Like, I didn't have tear-jerking moments, really. I would have loved one or two good cries to kind of close out the festival. Yeah. I think, too, and this is a weird thing to criticize because it's kind of on me, I didn't realize this was based on a true story until the credits popped up. And I think if I had known I was watching a reflection of someone's real life, I might have approached it with more emotion from the jump, because I'd be more like, oh my God, I can't believe this confluence of events happened, rather than, wow, a screenwriter put so many things at the exact same time. I think I would have approached it with a little bit more of an emotional lens. But yeah, I liked it. I thought it was very, very pretty. It's a weird note to end on. It wasn't gorgeous. It was just like, oh, that was really nice. Yeah.
It is funny though, like you're commenting about like the not really survivalist nature. This film opens with one of those like it's like a cold open from like the center of the film, and it's like, oh my God, we set up our tent on a beach and high tide's coming in, and like when it starts, you're like, this must be the end of the movie. Are they gonna make it? And when it gets to that scene, it's just like this silly moment where they're like, oh my God, I can't believe we didn't pay attention to where the tide line is.
Yeah, it's like they're trying to put in cinematic stakes in a movie that doesn't have cinematic stakes. It's existential stakes, and it's fine. But it is a little funny that they try to juice it that way.
Yeah. All right, we made it. We're back to a better recording setup. Apparently, not a stable one. But we did it, Stephen. We made it through TIFF. We made it all the way home. We're back to the thing. We're gonna be back seeing new releases soon. Any closing thoughts from the festival?
Overall, I thought it was a strong festival. I think, I forget if we gave our assessments before. In my mind, the highs and lows were less extreme this time around than other festivals. Like, I didn't have a Honey Boy experience. Like, I didn't have a Uncut Gems. You know, I didn't have the kind of movie where I'm like, holy shit. That's partly because I have already seen The Substance and I have already seen Anora. And if I hadn't, we probably would have found a way to watch it, and then we would have front loaded those things. But yeah, like I didn't have any huge ones. There were also very few huge misses. You know, honestly, like the main misses to me were like, I don't know. The end, I guess, was
The Room
quite
Next
a
Door
miss for me, and The Room Next Door was a big miss. But most things were in the realm of like, hey, that was pretty good. You know, that was pretty good. So I think the average bar was higher here. Like, there's a lot of movies that I'm comfortable recommending to people. I wish there were one or two more, like, scratching the heartfelt indie itch that I always have at these festivals of just, like, that made me cry my eyes out and no one else will ever talk about it. You know, I feel like we maybe scheduled ourselves away from some of those in an effort to see The Brutalist, unfortunately. But overall, I feel really happy, especially in a year where we haven't been able to record or see quite as much as usual. It felt good to do 25 movies of catch up and know that I have like a solid base of movies this year that I can talk about.
Yeah, we've already done the work for the rest of the year and into next year already.
Exactly.
I thought this was like a great festival overall. Like we didn't have any like big everyone knows about it necessarily as many of those as you said, so missed that a little bit, just knowing these are gonna, like, everybody's gonna be talking about this specifically in a few months or whatever. But I also usually go to a festival and some of it's a crapshoot, and you know, like sometimes we've done it before where I'm like 50-50 average, right? And I think with the exception of, as you said, The Room Next Door, which is like the one thing that I really, really actively disliked, the end, which was kind of like, you know, I liked aspects of it, but it definitely was not a good Midnight Madness.
But not successful.
And then Queer, which just felt like I didn't know the source material, so I didn't get what it was doing, so it was hard for me to grip onto it. But besides that, I kind of liked everything pretty much. Like, you know, it there's a few things that I really, really loved, but I think for the most part, it was like, I don't feel like the normal cynic that I.
And how did you feel? I assume you saw the news that the People's Choice Award winner was The Life of Chuck.
Oh yeah. When I saw that announced, I almost texted you because there was a moment where we were standing in line. And people were having the very conversation. What if it wins? What could it mean? Blah, 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 blah.
Right.
So I was like, Steven, the guy was on the money.
I know. We were kind of making fun of them of like, what if it wins? Won't it mean it gets awards? And it's like, yeah, but that's a stupid conversation because it hasn't won anything. I was wrong. People love it. Clearly, I'm the only one who doesn't want that much Nick Offerman voiceover. Everyone else is totally happy with it.
Yeah. So I was happy that it got something. I was maybe a little bit surprised, but yeah, I was like, yeah, good on you. I like The Life of Chuck.
Yeah, I like it. I would be surprised to go into the prognosticating mode. It doesn't seem like the kind of movie that could be a big awards hitter, just because the scope of it, what it's trying to do, just doesn't feel like that sort of material. So I'm curious if this is going to be a year where the TIFF win doesn't signify that, or I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what happens to this when it actually goes wide.
Yeah, like what if The Life of Chuck dies at 40 and then everything falls apart after that and the award winner at TIFF can't mean anything in the future?
Yeah, because what's weird about that movie, and I can't explain it, I see it as a beautiful thing to watch at home on streaming, and I have trouble imagining it as a go-to-the-theater experience because of the kind of warm melancholy that it is. I don't know. It hits an interesting niche, and I don't know how that's going to translate when it goes wide, but we'll see. Good on it.
Yeah, I could see it as this is number one on Netflix and everybody's watching it because it's number one on Netflix and everybody's talking about it because it's number one on Netflix. But yeah, I find it, I'd be surprised to see what trailer you cut for that movie makes everybody rush out to see it.
Right. Except for maybe an extended let's just say a sequence with no dialogue and no context.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's going to bring us to the end of our coverage of the 2024 Toronto International Film Festival. Stephen Miller, if people want to find you throughout the week, where can they do that?
People could find me at Threads and Blue Sky at sdavidmiller and sdavidmiller.com.
People can find me at ChristopherInRealLife.com or ChristopherIRL on a number of social platforms. You can find the podcast over at TheSpoilerWarning.com, where you can get a bunch of the back episodes of the show. If you want to subscribe to the show, you can do so in Overcast, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or wherever podcasts are found. If you want to know when the episodes go live, you can follow us at twitter.com/spoilerwarning, facebook.com/thespoilerwarning, or instagram.com/thespoilerwarning. If you want to get a hold of us directly, you can send an email to fans@thespoilerwarning.com, or you can use the contact form on our site. Music for this episode will come from a track selected from artlist.io, so hopefully you're enjoying that. And yeah, we're back. We got to figure out what we're watching, regular releases, Steven, and then get ready to do that. And yeah. That's it, guys.
We did it. Goodbye, Toronto. See you again next year.
Goodbye, Toronto. Goodbye, Canada. Yeah, we'll see you all soon with a regular review later.